What I'm going to do today is actually talk about a perspective. In our mediation trainings, I think all around the world, we start with a perception about conflict. We try to understand what it is. We try to understand its dynamics, what's inside it, its sources, its steps. And we try to understand what is conflict, and we try to improve our perspective towards conflict. Because as a mediator, what we do is to handle conflicts, right? This is the core subject of our profession. So how we perceive the conflict is really a crucial and a beginning element for our mediation profession. So today I'm going to do something like that. I want to put forward a perception towards conflict around us, conflicts that surround us, not only our relational conflicts with one person, but the winds and the clouds that include those kind of conflicts in any structure that we are in. I will put forward some kind of perspective, but I invite you to question everything I say, because whatever I say is the outcome of what I experienced, what I read, what I performed so far. So it's my perception. So you are really welcome to question everything I say, because none of us will be able to reach 100% truth at the end of the day, but we will be getting closer to what is really going on out there in our lives. So when we start our mediation trainings as a beginner, we talk about sources of conflict. What you see right now on the screen is one of the theories which tries to explain the sources of different sources of conflict. The wheel that you see is by Christopher Moore, and he says that there are different sources for conflict, and a conflict always includes more than one source inside it, and most of the time many sources inside it. It's never only data, it's not only about knowledge about something. There is always a communication, there is always an emotion, there is always some kind of interest, there is always the values that we bring from our past lives, and there's always a structure that we are in. If you're a student, maybe the structure of the school rules. If you're an employee, maybe the structure of the workplace that you work in. If you have the conflict in a family, probably the structure of the family. So they all are in interaction with each other. They shape each other. They have impact on each other. And one single conflict usually has a different scale of sources which are always interacting with each other. And one of them is structural conflicts. And this is a big new world, because as I said, in every step we take, we find ourselves in a different structure. The topic of this webinar will be a quick look to those structures. We always live in an environment, as I said, whether it's the school, it's the family, it's the traffic, it's the workplace. It may be the decade that you live in, it may be the century you live in, it may be the culture you live in, it may be the tribe you live in. Wherever you are, we are all surrounded by an environment, and it has its own context. It has its own culture. When I say culture, I mean the values that are accepted by the members of that environment. It has its own customs and practices, right? It has its own structures. And we are surrounded by the impacts of all those environmental dynamics. but that's not the whole story. There is also a relational scope of our environment. We have some kind of relation with peoples around us. We have partners, we have friends. Um, our relations in our lives are all surrounded by the environment, but that's not the whole story. We also have a personal world, like how we raised from our childhood, what our perceptions are, what are our mental activities, our emotions, our desires, our needs, our values. And it's like a big world consisting of different kind of areas. And they're all in interaction with each other. When I have a perception towards a specific issue coming from how I raised, what I believe in it, or whatever ideology I have, it certainly has an impact towards the relations I have. And it certainly has an impact towards the environment that I build in, and vice versa. And in our mediation procedures, we most of the time focus on our relational conflicts because of the abilities of the mediation. As a mediator, we are not psychologists, so we don't focus on our internal conflicts. But of course, we try to have knowledge about what's going on inside the participants, how they see things, what kind of values they have, what kind of emotions and interests they have. But our focus is not internal conflicts. And also as a mediator, the environmental dynamics are outside control of mediators because we are not able to change and transform the environmental impacts on the conflict. We're just trying to do something in the relational area, but it's important to be aware of the fact that it's not something isolated. Our relational conflicts cannot be isolated from our internal conflicts and our environmental conflicts. Let me give you an example about this. I work as a volunteer, I work in an orphan house. And in that house, there are teenager girls who are physically or sexually abused in some time in their life. And as in every environment in the world, this house, this orphan house, has its own environment and has its own sort of relations and has its own sort of personal impact. For example, let me give you a specific example from a specific observation I have. One day we sit on a bench on the garden of the house with a kid, and we are talking about how important friendship is for her. And as we talk, she hears the music that makes her really sad, and she just cries a little bit. Some tears drop, and she sees her best friend like 10 meters ahead, joking and laughing and having fun with some other girls. And that girl sitting just next to me calls for the name of that friend.
Yes.
I was saying we were sitting with this girl in the garden and she hears the sound and starts to cry a little bit and invites her best friend, who she sees like 10 meters ahead of us, talking and joking and laughing with other friends of her. And she doesn't hear. And that's really normal. She calls for her and she doesn't hear. And she says, "Oh my God, she's my best friend and she doesn't hear me." And then she calls her again, and then she cries more. And then she gets angry more than being sad. And she just stands up, goes to her house, and somehow hurts herself. And then when we talk with the directorate of the house, they mention about sharp objects in that orphan house and how they are restricted because teenagers may be hurting themselves with those kind of things. This seems like a totally different story than the scope of this webinar, but it's not. What I mentioned you with this story was the connection between the environmental dynamics and the relational dynamics and our internal world. The connection between them is somehow really strong that we don't see how they are really connected. That girl, I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to comment on anything that went on this day. I just share with you my observations. But that girl told me something really important. She said she's her best friend, she loves her, so she has to be with her. That was her perception towards friendship and towards love. And that certainly had an impact on how their relationship is shaped. Because in her world, a best friend has to be there when she's called. And that certainly creates the conflict between them. And that certainly created a different rule in that orphan house about sharp objects. And vice versa, having a rule about sharp objects in that orphan house sent back a different message to those kids about being trusted, about being loved, and how they should shape their relationships and how they feel about and perceive about those kind of incidents. So it's like a big wind and cloud around us. Those kind of dynamics are circling around us all the time. In our internal world, in our relationships, and in our environment. They are shaped by each other. They are impacted by each other. And they are searching for a balance. Whenever this balance is damaged somehow, a conflict tries to reestablish that balance. This is why a conflict is really powerful and really valuable for us. It's kind of a warning that there's going something wrong. And it tries to take an attention and calls for help. There is saying that there's something wrong in that balance and it has to be healed somehow. Now, I'm showing you a picture of a cartoon, and you probably think that why that weird lady shows us Alice in Wonderworld. I have two reasons for that. First of all, I love the story, and there's always a something to talk about in every kind of incident, so I'm showing this. But the interesting thing about this webinar is the first interaction between Alice and the cat. Remember that when Alice goes to the Wonderland, she sees the cat and asks the cat, "Where should I go?" And the cat answers, "That depends on where you want to go." However we structure our environment depends on what we want to have at the end of the day. When we try to establish conflict resolution systems or some kind of system in a workplace or in a school or in a family or in a country, it is important to know where we want to go. And where we want to go is now the thing that I am trying to explain. I will try to build a house for you. And this house will have 3 pillars and the roof. Those pillars you can find more information about in the first source at the bottom of the page. And the roof, you can find more about in the source, the second source at the bottom of the page. As you know, we don't have to be engineers or architects. All houses, all structures have pillars, and they should have some strong pillars. 3 of them are really important. One of them is some kind of power contest. In every conflict, there are 3 basic elements. One of them is power. We all have some sort of powers in ourselves or in our relationships or in our environments. The second important element is our rights. I'm not only talking about legal rights, the rights that are structured in that environment, what we feel we have right to do, and our interests. We are not able to isolate our conflicts from the power, from rights, and from interest elements. So if we have 3 elements in a conflict, then we should have some kind of pillars responding those elements in a structure, right? If we are talking of a workplace environment, we should have some kind of rules and administrative procedures or some kind of decision makers, right? We should have a power-based tools to construct an efficient and constructive system. But as you see here, I specifically draw this pillar as the narrowest pillar because that's the place we have for those power contests. As a second pillar, we can talk about rights-based tools because this is the second element in a conflict. We need to have some kind of tools in order to vocalize our complaints towards some kind of experiences that we don't feel comfortable about. If we think we have some right to do about something, we should have some mechanisms to vocalize those kind of opinions of us. We need to have some kind of investigation procedures, or we need to have a right to go for litigation if we don't see any other opportunity to fulfill our needs towards getting a rightful outcome. But again, I draw that pillar narrower than the third one about interest. As you know, if you got your mediation training, you know that interests are the most important elements in our mediation meetings. This is the element that we try to understand, try to put light, and try to structure some kind of agreement meeting those interests. So we want to have 3 pillars in our house, in the place that we go, in order to meet our needs in a structure. We need some kind of power elements. We need some kind of rights elements, rights-based elements, and we need some sort of tools to talk about our interests. It's like, you know the story of a jar, a professor with a jar. He puts lots of rocks in a jar and asks the students if it's full. If there are, for example, 5 big rocks in a jar, and the students answer, yes, the jar is full. And he puts smaller rocks inside the jar, and he asks the students if it's full, and they say, yes, it's full. But then the professor adds sand in the jar and ask the students whether the jar is full, and students laugh and answer, yes, now it's full. It's something like that. We need big rocks in our jar, in our workplace, in our school, in our families. We need some big rocks in our environment, which are the most important elements, but that's not the whole story. Most of the time, we structure our workplaces, our families, our countries, our schools based on power-based and rights-based systems. And weirdly, they understand each other really well, because when you pursue a rights-based tool, you need some kind of power-based tools to implement it. So they are in connection with each other. For example, you complain about something in a workplace and you request an investigation. In order to perform this investigation, you need to have some kind of rules and some kind of powerful procedure or a person who performs that. So they are together and they're really complex. It's not really easy to understand what is my right. I'm a lawyer and it's really complicated for me. If you're not a lawyer, I want to ask you if it is easy for you. When we go to a litigation, there are at least 3 lawyers, 2 of them attorneys and 1 is judge, and they all have different opinions for that specific circumstance. So it's not really easy to understand, and it's not easy to structure it because it requires a lot of details. So it's hard, and I'm talking about something more easy. Talk about it, to negotiate about it. And it doesn't need any tools coming from power-based or rights-based system. Because whenever you negotiate something and whenever you are fulfilled with the outcome based on your interest, you are okay to go. You don't need anyone else to come and perform that outcome with force. You're okay with it, and it means you're okay with it. So those 3 important pillars are necessary for the health of the building that we want to go. But it's not enough. We need a roof for the house. And that roof is the communication culture inside that structure. In the example that I mentioned you about the orphan house and my communication with the children, the teenager girl, I asked her whether you talked about your need towards your friend, that she needs to be there when you're sad. Have you ever said that? Have you ever mentioned? Have you ever explained? And she said no. And she said she doesn't know how to express that. Unfortunately, we are not raised in a way in order to be comfortable to talk about our needs, our emotions, and our thoughts. It's not how we are raised. So this is why it is so complex for us, but it's really the easiest thing on the world to do. It doesn't make any sense to have a roof on our head when we don't have any pillars. And it doesn't make any sense to have pillars without any roof ahead of us. We need all of it to structure a house, to structure a system. So this is where we want to go. When I ask the cat, where do I want to go? This is the answer. And it depends on what kind of structure we are in. If you're in a school, you need something different. If you're in a prison, you need something different. If you're in a traffic, you need something different. But in every environment, we need those kind of elements, those pillars and this roof in our system. In that orphan house, we decided to do something. There were a lot of systems based on rights and power, because it's a state institution, so they have anything but rights and power. But the missing element was the 3rd and 4th one. So we decided to implement peer mediation in the orphan house. You know, mediation is, okay, useful, but peer mediation is something else. Nobody can understand a 15-year-old girl better than another 15-year-old girl. So we asked, okay, why don't we apply a peer mediation? So we asked 30 girls whether they want to be mediators. Some of them volunteered. And we trained them to be mediator. Interestingly, the ones who wanted to be mediator were the ones who used power methods more than the other ones. And it was interesting for them to be mediator because they thought they will be the one who will decide on the conflicts. That was a misunderstanding for them. But at the end of the day, they wanted to be mediators. And something happened. Remember, I mentioned 3 locations of conflict, and peer mediation seems like something corresponding to relational conflict, because there will be a conflict between a 15-year-old girl and a 15-year-old girl, and the third girl will be the mediator in that relational conflict. But that was not the whole story. Something else happened in that orphan house. After a while, one of the mediator girls in our regular meetings asked us, how can I hit them now? It was a girl who had a method of power by hitting other girls to achieve what she wants. And she said, I am the mediator now, and it feels a little weird to behave in a way that I used to behave. Okay. Then she said, I feel obliged to be a model for the others, because she repeatedly hear things about how to listen to each other, how to ask questions, how to understand each other, how to do empathy. And it was not a education, it was not something that she only listens from their teachers. It was also something that she needs to vocalize towards other friends. She had to be the one who asked other girls to listen to each other. And she repeated so many times. After a while, she said, I feel obliged to behave in a way that I ask the other girls to behave. So while we try to put a structure in the relational conflict, suddenly we faced something different. We faced a new structure in the communication between those girls. And one other girl said she used to visit her mother occasionally, and she said, my relationship with my mother is now different. And I asked, how come? And she said, I listen to her better. And you know what she said? She listens to me more. I don't know whether her mom really listens to her more, or maybe it's not the case, and just the kid listens to her mother more, and that's why she thinks her mother listens more. I don't know what's really going on there, but it's not important. The important thing is that the new perception is different. And she said, it feels more powerful. Before that, she had a notion, she had a perception towards power only in terms of physical demonstrations. But from now on, she perceives power in terms of listening and understanding. And this is a big shift in the environment of orphan house. Now they have a different perception. Now they have a different relation. And now they have a different environment. And as I said before, it's all a cycle. And it's all a cycle which searches a balance. And they found a balance in terms of their own perceptions and in terms of their own experiences. What do you think? If you have any questions, you may ask. If you want to share any experiences about the conflicts that you think are shaped or escalated or impacted by the structures of your environment. You can share with us anything that you wish.
Thank you so much, Cecile. For me, it reminded me so much on the discussions we have regularly, of course, with companies that want to implement conflict management systems, and it is sometimes their perception is, okay, if we just put, like, if we're going to educate someone and who is a mediator, and then he's there, and then he says, hello, any conflicts, please come to me, then it's solved. And we're trying to explain and work together with the companies for this holistic approach, as you said, for looking into the culture of it, looking into the communication culture. Is there a culture for doing mistakes? Is there who is already there also as a resource for conflict management, conflict resolution? Who can you empower, and so on? And of course, also, what is the right system, the legal system? Who is that connected? What happens when there is a conflict on a workplace that would go to the court? How could you handle it differently? So thank you so much. For me, it was very, very helpful to have this perception also to a total different subject and environment, as you gave us with the example and the case study you showed us. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And yes, I experienced the same thing too. When you employ or when you outsource a mediator in the company, it's just one rock in the jar. Okay, it's positive, good, but it's not enough. We need to respect the elements and the dynamics of the conflict. And we should be addressing as much as we can to all of it. Otherwise, it's just you're either missing a pillar or the roof of the house. And it's not something that you will be happy to live in. What we're trying to do is to structure a place, a workplace or a house or a school, something that we want to be happy to live in.
And maybe one other thought that came to my mind, this is because you showed us the 3 pillars, and one was the power pillar. And this reminded me also, of course, on leadership, on management in teams and so on. And there is also like this strong connection between leadership and conflict resolution, actually. And it's not that leaders have to be mediators for all the conflict, but should know about how to treat conflict, what to do when there is conflict, and also have a huge possibility for the communication culture in it. So I would see this. I thought all the time, okay, this power pillar, yes, it is small on the one hand, but the people who are behind it, if you would say leaders are in this pillar, they have also an overall responsibility to maintain the other systems and the other pillars and the roof.
I totally agree with you. And especially we need them for the roof, because the rules are the easy parts. But establishing a culture and the way of communication, a shared vision, is not something that you can do in a moment. It needs some effort and it needs a leader to do so. Sometimes managers of companies think that those kind of structures are for other employees and they are immune from those structures. There are 10 people at the leadership and they think they are not involved in those structures, but it doesn't make any sense when they are not involved in it, because they are the leaders and they are the examples. And unless it is used and benefited by them, it's not easy to establish that culture. So we need them for the roof.
Can I just comment on your structures, Cecile? My feeling about it, having had quite a long corporate career, is I understand how it works with the culture, communications culture. And by the way, I was a former communications director as well, so comms is a thing for me. But I feel that it shouldn't be the roof, it should be like the foundations, or the culture and the communications, and that the other things sit on top of that. So it's just kind of, I understand why the model works, but I'm feeling that that needs to be the foundation rather than the thing that goes on the top.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, when I thought I resembled it as a roof, but of course it can be the how you said,
Foundation.
the foundation of it. Yeah, it can be picturized like this too. But I think we mentioned the same thing.
Yeah.
The pillars and the foundation or the roof, they all need each other. One
Yeah.
of them is missing, the house is not properly structured.
Yeah. Thank you.
But I will think about your suggestion. Maybe it may be a better picture. Thank you.
And also the point about leadership as well, I think that's in there as well. Maybe the leadership is on the roof and the culture is on the bottom. I don't know. We all have different ideas.
Yeah. But it's nice to discuss about those things. We should be discussing about those things. Otherwise, we just live in it and we're cycling among those locations of conflicts and we're not aware of what we're losing. So this is
an excellent model. I really like it. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, any other suggestions or comments or questions?
Questions?
Or experiences that you had?
You can also write into the chat if you don't want to ask it in person. And then we can.
Even in our houses, we have some kind of structures. Imagine a house with 2 parents and 1 kid. You all have a power-based system. Like if you want to raise a kid, you have to have some kind of rules. It depends on your culture. It depends on your perception towards the world. But you have 1 or 2, maybe few, maybe a lot, but you have some kind of power-based tools to raise your kid. And you provide some kind of rights to your kid. You give some, allowances to him. You give some rights to go out, but you put some rules to come back at certain time. And you create a negotiation environment with your kid to decide upon some important stuff, especially as the kid grows. So when I said structure, it can be anything actually. It doesn't matter if it's 10,000 employee, a workplace with 10,000 employees, or just a house with 3 people.
There is a question, Sezil. Dewey, hopefully I pronounce it right, said, what are the situations that will lead to court cases due to work disputes? What if there is no mediation at the workplace?
What are the situations that will lead to a court case? The answer to that would be anything that you want, because most of the time during mediation, what I hear from parties is that she doesn't listen to me. She doesn't care what I say. She is rude. She doesn't take into consideration about what I say. And suddenly, those things add up to each other and create some kind of financial claim. How? It can be, a resignation, and the employee may be entitled to some kind of compensation according to the legal system of that country. It can be a claim of mobbing in the extreme cases. When I say extreme, I'm not saying it's something irregular. It's something that we face a lot. But when I say extreme, in terms of destructive dynamics of conflict, it is extreme. But anything you can imagine can lead to a court case. It all depends on the dynamic. And what if there is no mediation at the workplace? then they have actually two options, whether people should be able to negotiate their interests among each other. And that requires a strong culture and strong skills for people, because negotiating is not only depending on the culture, it also depends on the skills of participants. So either the company should have strong skills and strong culture to negotiate interests, or otherwise, most of the time, tools based on powers and rights are used. And this means most of the time the powerful person wins, or some kind of adversarial process starts, such as litigation. I'm not able to answer your question directly because they are too wide and really wide questions. So it requires a lot of comment inside it. If you can specify your question in more detail, maybe I can give more beneficial answer to you. Because the answer to both of the questions is like anything can happen.
There is another question. What kind of specific conflict handling skills would you most strongly advise leaders to cultivate among their team members? Merle asked this.
For leaders, conflict handling skills actually leads up to one single strong answer, which is negotiation. Because negotiation itself requires a lot of things. But first of all, we lack a lot of skills in terms of listening. We think that listening is something like not speaking while the other person speaks. And that's not really the listening. We sometimes listen to each other while thinking something else. We sometimes listen to each other with listening to that story with our own agenda. Like, I've been there too. I experienced that too. This happened to me that too. I behaved in that way in that kind of circumstances. We think our own agenda when we're listening to each other, but listening is something else. It's more easy, but it's not that common. It's not something that we are educated about. Listening means listening only the speaker with the speaker's agenda, putting away all my values and all my judgments and all my perceptions that I constructed so far in my life. Even this creates a big step. This is the foundation of negotiation. This is the foundation of mediation. And this is the foundation of any kind of communication. So starting with the listening skill, which is the most easy one, you can build up a strong conflict handling skill in your company. Rest is just build up on the listening. This is why it is so easy, but uncommon, unfortunately.
And I would add to that, if I may, that I have the experience that leaders, it is really helpful for managers, leaders, supervisors, if they know about conflict dynamics. If you create an awareness about what is a conflict, also the positive sides of a conflict, and what are the conflict dynamics in general, like escalation, but not only that, how do people behave and feel when they are caught in a conflict? And I have the feeling, if you know more about those dynamics, then it is that is sometimes also the first step to understand the concepts behind it, the emotions in the room, and then also to decide whether you are the person with conflict management skills, like as Sezil said, active listening, negotiation skills, or maybe also if the conflict is not, you can't interfere in this conflict because you are, for example, part of this conflict, but that needs a little bit of analysis, of understanding what the dynamics of conflict is about. And I really recommend that to everybody who is working with teams in a workplace, to really also look at the dynamics of conflicts, I would call it.
It's a shame that although it's a very basic social interaction, we don't know much about conflict if we are not mediators or, in those kind of professions. It's something that we face every day, repeatedly, and we don't know anything about it. We negotiate repeatedly in one day, but we don't know anything about it. It's our basic social interaction, but we are not familiar with the dynamics, as you said. So it's really important to know what we do.
Do you have any other questions or remarks, or want to share your own experiences with conflicts in your environment?
I guess either it was too explicit or maybe it was too confusing.
No, Sezil, I think there was a lot to think about that you presented us. And like there is a lot of, a complexity, of course, to it. And me, for myself, I have to process the models you told us about. It was very, very helpful.
Thank you. I hope it was beneficial to all listeners. And I hope it was okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sezil, for giving us this really interesting insights into your voluntary work, right? You said that this is a voluntary work that you're doing besides your lawyer and mediator activity and coach. So thank you very much. Thank you for everybody who was here today. And there are other upcoming webinars about all kind of topics around mediation. We have had webinars about mediation and music, which was a very specific topic, but also like peace mediation, family mediation, negotiation and mediation. If you want to look it up, to look at some of our webinars from the past, there you can go on our YouTube channel, and there you can see them. And I think, Sezil, there is a lot of compliments in the chat. That is for you. You can read. Not, then I wish you a very good evening, morning, night, wherever you are.